Well, hello, everybody. This is Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Pete Docter and Kemp, who are both co-directors and co-writers of Pixar's new film Soul. And I want to mention that Kemp is having quite an amazing year because he's also the writer of One Night in Miami, and he seems to be hitting the zeitgeist at the moment. So welcome both of you guys. I actually just want to start and ask you, Pete, when you started this project, did you ever wonder, this is too much of an ambitious idea to actually put into an animated film?
Oh yeah, yeah. Pretty much every day during the 4 years of making it, I wondered that. It's not small questions that we're asking. Kind of like, why live? What are we waking up for in the morning? Why are we born with a purpose? All those kind of things. But that's intriguing to me. So it felt like I know I'm not the only person to think about this stuff. And if we can make it entertaining, wow, that'd be cool. And I feel like in a way that's really one of our we're so privileged to be at a studio that allows us to do that. We have this amazing reach thanks to Disney. People around the world see our stuff. So I feel like we really need to use that to push the limits and try to set new boundaries for ourselves, and do new things that we haven't done before.
Joe, I mean, Kemp, I was just, when I was watching, I've seen the film a couple of times, the fact that here's a struggling, artist at a cross path in his life, and how much do you relate to the fact that you have Joe, faced with as I mentioned, that crossroads.
I mean, I relate painfully well to Joe Gardner. But you know what? I think a lot of people relate painfully well. I mean, the specificity of the character, of course, it started with me putting a lot of my own experiences into feeding it, with Joe being the same age as me from the same city, and also kind of being the same kind of like struggling artist who's doing something else and wondering like at what point should you kind of pack it up and give up on your dream.
Hmm.
And then to get the opportunity far after you were ever supposed to give up. I understand all of those things innately, and because of that, that's why I kind of felt like when Pete asked me to come on board with this, that I felt like it would resonate with people, because I think we all constantly question what we're doing and if we're doing the right thing. I mean, one of the things that I found so powerful about when I first met Pete was that he told me about winning the Oscar for Inside Out. And the next day he had to go to work. And he went to work the next day and was like, I have to come up with a new idea now. And there's this kind of like, we always have these dreams about like getting our wild, most stories, particularly in the children and family, end when you get what you've always wanted. And I was so excited about the idea of the get what you always wanted being 2/3 of the way through this film. And it's everything after that it's like, I've never seen that before in an animated film. And I think like, this is the part that I think is that is going to be so different than so many other stories. And that's what really drew me to it.
And Pete, how did the story come about? I know you've been answered. I mean, you've been asked this many times, but
Well, as Kemp said, I kind of hit a place where I was like, this is probably about as good as it's like beyond my wildest dreams of box office and audience and all the things by which most of us measure success. So why don't I feel like everything's fixed? Why don't I feel like my life is all perfect? I don't. So I just started thinking more about that. And I think about that time my son was going off to college, and I was thinking like, is he born with a purpose? Where is he going? What's he going to do with his life? And so all these thoughts kind of came together into creating a place of a place that I imagined must give us our personality. From the day my son was born, I could see him in there to some degree. aspects of his personality and who he was and how he approached things. And where did that come from? There must be a place where all of us get our interests and our, sense of who we are. And so that's really the start of it, that concept of a great before, a place that our souls would have been trained. And then from there, it was a lot of decision making and work to put the rest of the story together. And we can get into that if you want. But it's a long story.
No, absolutely. I, I, I want to ask you a few geeky questions. Why is it that I was blown away by the widescreen, by the fact that this is the first Pixar film that I've seen that's using a wide aspect ratio? Can you tell us about that choice?
Well, it's actually not. We have done a couple of films that were widescreen before. It's the first one that I've directed, and I think part of it was that I felt like I'm getting so used to 185 aspect that let's just shake things up. There's something about this subject matter that feels more epic, and that we can really take advantage of this wider aspect ratio. So it was kind of just like let's. There were a number of choices like that. Even like working with Trent and Atticus, that like, okay, this is just way out of the box of what we normally do. Let's do it. We gotta continue to kind of surprise people and throw curveballs. And so the aspect ratio, like I say, was one of those, and it did feel like this film. There's something more grand and big about it, and we could really take advantage of that space.
Mm-hmm. And Kemp, New York City. It's another character in this film. And how did you guys arrive about making New York City a focal point?
Well, I think, of course, once the decision was made to have the main character be a struggling jazz musician, I think the choice is it's either got to be in New York or New Orleans. So, and New Orleans has actually been done fairly, recently. And, like, for example, Princess and the Frog is set in New Orleans. New Orleans has been covered a lot. And New York City was the other obvious choice. Now, of course, the decision to be in New York happened before I came on board. But I like to think that that's probably part of the reason why I was the right guy to come on board, being from New York and having grown up there. That's my old stomping grounds, and I was loving the idea, because you see New York so often in animation and films in general, and in animation in particular, it's kind of like this. It can become almost like a generic New York. I love the fact that they wanted to get the specificity of the boroughs. Like when the decision was made that Joe was going to live in Queens, it was like, oh my God, this is great. And I immediately, when you're talking to the designers and you're giving out ideas and they're doing their research, you're able to bring a specificity so that someone who is from there will immediately recognize where Joe is in the city. It's been so great once Soul came out, they were like, so did Joe live in Jackson Heights? And sure enough, when you see Joe walking by the L train, I used to live in Woodside for a while. So a lot of the photo references are Woodside, Sunnyside, and Jackson Heights. And the 7 train was actually my commute. So that I remember talking to one of the story artists, Trevor, with the images of Joe in the scene we call Epiphany, where he's riding in the 7 and it makes that hard turn behind Silver Cup Studios. I mean, those are all the specific things that I think allowed us to bring New York to the screen in a way that it's never been seen in animation, because it's subtle, but it's also, we've pushed it stylistically. I mean, Pete can talk about it in more detail. People have described it as photorealistic. It's actually not. It's actually really pushed stylistically, combined with some amazing lighting work that gives it this unique look that's both recognizable, but also feels different and pushed and heightened.
Speaking of specificity, one of the most beautiful scenes to me is the one in the barbershop, for many reasons. And one of them is seeing the texture of the hair, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time that Pixar features African American characters, correct?
Well, not entirely. We have like Frozone and secondary, tertiary characters, but certainly our lead it is. And funny enough, you brought the hair up because that was, I think, the first thing Kemp when you came on, you were like the first thing he was talking about was hair. I'm like, really, hair? We're talking about hair? We brought Kemp to help us flesh out the story and the character of Joe, and he's like, you know what, hair. You were talking about how on Monsters Inc. Sully's fur blowing in the wind was like kind of like, whoa, that's so
Yeah,
trippy.
there have been these moments in each Pixar film where the animation power really shows you something you've never seen before. And for me, it was that moment in Monsters Inc. where Mike and Sully get banished, and Sully is lying in the snow. And at the time, watching Sully's fur blow in the high winds, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I've never seen anything like this. And it made me think about, like, I've never really seen black hair rendered with any kind of variety or subtle. Even Frozone is bald, so
Correct.
it was like, so the idea of like a barbershop and seeing the varieties of black hair being given that attention. You look at a character like Dorothea Williams, the band leader, and her hair. I mean, to me, it was an opportunity to have that amazing thing that Pixar does so often. And I felt like the amazing thing, one of the many amazing things in this film, because I also think the Jerrys are another amazing thing people have never seen before. But I think the black hair could be one of those amazing things that audiences like me would lock in on and go, oh my God, if only we can do hair like in the Pixar film Soul.
And Kemp was also very vocal about that being important culturally. And obviously, me not growing up in black culture, I didn't know. And so I was kind of like, really? This is, I mean, you can tell my haircut.
It was a very
important to me.
It was a very funny brain trust argument when you're talking about, because the way it worked is that Joe getting the suit was a part of the story for a long time. And one of the things that bumped for me was that Joe getting the suit for the performance, and I saw the character design and I was like, and a haircut. And I'd say like, oh, the haircut's not as important as the suit. And I'm like, yeah, the haircut is as important as the suit. And you're trying to get this idea across. And I think it really sunk in with Pete when I told him, if I wasn't able to get in with my barber and get lined up, I wouldn't have come to my Pixar interview. Like, it's so, this is pre-COVID when I haven't seen my barber.
Correct, yeah.
But it was like, it's so a part of your look, your, as much as your clothing. And I think that's what kind of opened up the idea of at least giving it a shot to try to do the barbershop. Of course, making it work from a story standpoint is a whole other issue, which is probably why that barbershop scene is the most rewritten scene. I think I rewrote it 40 times.
Yeah, probably.
Times before we finally got it to work.
Trying to like find, why is this scene in the movie? What's it saying? How's it serving our main character?
Yeah, to me, it's the one that I stayed with when I watched the film. It was really beautiful. Pete and Kemp. Growing up, I adore 101 Dalmatians, and my namesake Roger is in the film. And there is a feel of 101 Dalmatians in Soul. I see you nodding, so I love to hear the connection.
We were looking for some way to capture enough reality that you'd recognize it, but then still take it somewhere else. And give it a twist, some sense of style. And 101 Dalmatians is so brilliantly done between, it definitely has a Ronald Searle influence, the great illustrator, British illustrator. But then Ken Anderson, who is largely the production designer on it, took elements that were somewhat of restrictions and made them into positives. So the fact they had to get rid of their ink and paint department for cost reasons. They used Xerox, and so this line work became very important. And all of these choices, the restrictions, I think really blossomed into this beautiful design, this great statement. And so when we were looking at it, we were like, how can we use similar? We want to find a way to make New York kind of gritty and textural and hard, and as contrasted to the great before, which is a soft, vaporous, ethereal kind of a feel. So really, those two ideas helped to design and contrast off each other. As soon as we knew that the softness of the great before was going to be there, we tried to design in some real angular and rhythmic. Oh, and part of it was as well just jazz. The idea of jazz, had such a profound effect on the film themically, design-wise. I mean, you look at those great jazz album covers from the 60s and the 70s, and they've just got really strong graphics, and that sense of rhythm that's there in the music is evident in the design. And so we pulled as much as we could from that to try to influence the New York stuff.
And speaking of restrictions, Kemp, Dorothea is such a powerful character, but she seems to not move very much. That she's, um, I mean, that she seems to gather her strength from not doing much. Am I making any sense? The fact that
Mhm.
her
Yeah,
move.
I mean, she was totally, when we were talking about, first, there's not a lot of woman band leaders. So like even like making that decision, that's why it was so great to have Terry Lynn Carrington as one of our consultants, because she's a band leader and she was really able to really educate us on what it takes to be a band leader in a profession that's dominated by men, and how strong she has to be. But you have to balance that strength and avoid kind of leaning into what could be perceived as like a negative stereotype. So we talked about band leaders that we admired, and I think we talked a lot about Miles Davis and
Mhm.
how other jazz artists, to the public, to journalists, Miles Davis was always seen as like so aloof, downright mean. But then you hear stories from those in his inner circle and those who performed with him, and he was always described as warm and gracious and supportive. And that felt like a really good template for Dorothea, where in the beginning, she has an arc over the film. In the beginning, you see her as being so aloof that like she barely wants to give Joe any attention. There's barely any movement. But then at the end of the film, when Joe is a member of the band, she's actually warm and loving and imparting wisdom on him. So I think that was all just a part of what we decided on would be the characterization of that Dorothea Williams character. Plus, it's also funny for her to just sit there still. It got a laugh.
She's the mountain that Joe needs to climb. If Joe came in and she was like, "Hey, welcome, come on up," then it's too easy. He's got to work. We got to make him work for it.
Correct. Going back to the New York City feel, the I want to use the word distortion quality to it. It reminded me of 1970s uh, um, films in New York City. Is that something that was how difficult was that
It
to
makes
shoot?
me so happy to hear you say that because it was explicitly something that Ian McGibbon, our DP, and Matt Asbury, the two DPs on the show, they were like, the great New York films were made in the 70s. We want to use the
Yeah.
same anamorphic lenses, the same kind of film stock. We want it to feel like the New York of our in the feel of New York that we've gotten from those movies. So it was a very conscious choice. Even like if you look at the boba out of focus boba, they're stretched because it's shot in an anamorphic lens. Of course, this is all virtual. We don't have any actual lenses, but you can make any choice you want. Everything you see on screen is intentional, and so we try to use all of that to have a specific effect on the way the audience feels about the story and the characters.
That's
Well,
great too, because when you're on Earth, it should, and I think it does. It feels like a New York movie. You know what I mean? Like when you're on Earth, it feels like you're in the middle of a New York movie, not a movie
you're
in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I'm originally from New York City and lived most of my life in New York City, and I'm a cinephile, and so I'm a very much attracted to the New York City, the 1970s, and when I was watching your film, that's where my mind was
That's
going,
so
and I
cool.
was no, and I was noticing, the grittiness
Hmm.
and which is very refreshing for an animated film to be capturing that. Which brings me, so you have the world of you've almost created two different films because you have the New York world that has its own vocabulary and his own look, and then we go to the other world and how creating something from scratch, is that something that it's easier to do or more challenging?
Both. I know that's not really a direct answer, but it does seem like there are some things that are easier, and then there are some things that are just really hard. In the case of this film, you have souls. And what do souls look like? Nobody knows. I mean, there have been a lot of religious and other traditions that have hinted at it being ethereal, non-physical, vaporous, kind of clues to maybe what we might want to do. But a lot of it was just playing around until we felt like we found it. A lot of trial and error, a lot of different technology work, because the designs themselves on this film are so simple, and yet we knew we wanted enough complexity visually so that there'd be interest to hold us. So the whole fog with little lines that define edges, all of that came out of iterative work, of just sitting in a room with people and discovering stuff. But I kind of feel like Inside Out was boot camp for this movie. You know, the concept of taking emotions and turning them into characters, that was really hard. But this film was like that plus some, I think, in terms of the difficulty of trying to crack it.
And Kemp, you co-wrote and co-direct. I mean, how does that work? Um, how do you guys share the
Well, I mean, the best way to describe it is not that we're co-directors, is that he's the director and I'm the co-director, which is he's the pilot and I'm the co-pilot. And I think if you look at it in that fashion, it actually immediately makes sense. You know what I mean? Like where he's in the captain's chair and I'm in the co-pilot's chair. There's certain things that, you know, I'm a second set of eyes for just about it. Well, not for just about, for everything. The whole point is to be a second set of eyes, to cover blind spots, to give a second opinion on just about everything, from, you know, edit to character design to being in animation dailies, and until we land the plane and get the film made. You know, but he's the director. He's the one deciding where the plane is going.
And you can hear just by listening to Kemp talk that, you know, he was brought in as a co-director, or sorry, as a writer, but it quickly just became obvious he's contributing in so many different ways outside of the script. You know, talking about texture of hair and details in New York and musical ideas and all this. So it just became very obvious that Kemp was just an essential part of the film.
And speaking of musical aspects, you know, you have two contrasting worlds. You have, you know, the jazz music, and then you have the Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross world that is scoring, you know, the Beyond. You know, can you tell us about the two musical worlds?
That was something I would probably credit Kevin Nolting, our editor. He started using the temp music to really define the worlds musically. So we would use scores temporarily pirated from other movies to give us this ethereal, kind of uplifting, otherworldly feel, and then straight up jazz standards that we got off of albums that we'd put for all the New York stuff. And it really brought this amazing contrast. So then working with John Batiste and Trent and Atticus, they both kind of knew where they were, what they were doing, what their contribution to the film was, but as kind of separate entities. But then they had this very interesting connection that I feel like the sound really, and there's a couple of key moments in the movie where those two worlds blend. And so the three of them working together was really fantastic to see how they had come from such different backgrounds and ideas and stuff, the way of working, but such an immediate respect for each other, and clicked really quickly.
I mean, this film is so much about the music is such an part of the DNA of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Jazz and the stuff that Trent and Atticus did, it's all so much a part of the DNA. And that really speaks to how much both sides. I mean, Trent and Atticus spent like 6 months scoring, which for them is like, that's a long time. We batted around a lot of ideas. And John Batiste kind of went like so far above and beyond what we initially asked of him. And then again, even that symbiotic thing, that wasn't even part of the plan. It's just something that would happen naturally. Part of the collaborative experience is, you know, you're sharing sequences with Trent and Atticus that have music from John Batiste and vice versa. And it's sparking ideas in each side of like, oh, you know, here's the thing we did. And also we had a few ideas for that thing we heard. Do you care about our opinion? And it's like, well, of course we do. And it turns into this unexpected kind of wonderful musical collaboration sometimes. I mean, I think the score of the film is one of the things that, even though I didn't do it and Pete didn't do it, it's one of the things I'm like so proud of.
Yeah.
Weirdly. I just feel like musically it's so different, and on paper it shouldn't have worked, and it did. Like jazz plus 9 Inch Nails. No one's ever said that, ever.
Well, they have now.
And now you can and say like, oh, you mean like soul? I don't know. I'm so proud of the fact that element worked.
I mentioned the barbershop scene as one of a very memorable, a beautiful moment, and the one visual that I cannot get out of my mind is the hands on the piano and watching him play. Can you tell us about the development, Kemp, of that, and who came up with that, and whose hands are those? Jamie Foxx's hands?
Well, no, we say that it's Jean-Baptiste's hand because, we don't do mocap, of course. So, it's animators animated that. But usually in animation, you kind of move away. You try not to show the hands because it's actually quite difficult. And when Jean-Baptiste was playing the film in the sessions, we just had a bunch of cameras recording him. And if you see Jean-Baptiste's hands, he has these long fingers that are actually perfect for animation. So, I mean, it made just perfect sense. Joe is a tall, gangly guy to kind of model. We always say that Jamie Foxx is Joe's head and Jean-Baptiste is Joe's hands, because the movement and showing the playing. And we always thought that it was, I have to tell you, you don't even know this, Pete. I just heard this a little while ago, because people have talked about, is this movie going to draw in kids? A buddy, like a person I met, I was interviewing for something, said that his small child won't stop rewatching Soul, and he keeps on leaning in to whenever Joe plays the piano, because there is something hypnotic about watching those fingers move, and we always suspected that hypnotic nature of it would really draw kids in. But yes, that's Jean-Baptiste's hands. And I mean, Pete can speak to the MIDI programming, so that we basically program the keys so that the keys move, and then the animators are able to animate based on the movements that they saw Jean-Baptiste do when he was recording it in the sessions.
It's funny that you mentioned that kids find it hypnotic, because I found that I can't put my pun intended finger on why I found it so alluring. And you do it twice, I think, in the film, and in both times is so.
We had seen footage, and you can go on the YouTube and look. There's Oscar Peterson. He's a kind of a larger guy at his peak, but super long fingers, beautiful. Just watch him play; it's fascinating. And the other guy I love watching play is Earl Father Hines, who was big from like 40s through the 80s or so, 70s probably. And just watching, I knew like, okay, if I'm drawn into this, I bet we can elevate it. We can take it even further. It's going to be cool. And that was one of the first things that made us click in on jazz. But then it became so themic to the film, the idea of improvisational, that as a musician, you're not just reading music, you're taking whatever it is that you're given, the tune, and you're turning it into something very specific, unique, and personal. And that felt so themic to what it was we were trying to say about the movie, In fact, there's a really great story that Herbie Hancock told that we heard, and that became a real central part of the film. This idea, he said he was playing with Miles Davis. He said they were having a great tour and a great concert, and then he said Miles is playing a solo, and Herbie says, I played this chord that was so wrong. I thought I reduced that whole night to rubble and ruined everything. And instead, he says, Miles took a breath, played some notes, and he made my chord right. And Herbie says, I could not figure out how he did that. He said, here's how he did it. He didn't judge it as right or wrong. He just took it as something new that happened. And he did what any great musician should try to do, which is take anything that happens and turn it into something of value. Yeah. And when we heard that story, we're just like, that's the movie. We got it. Jazz is going to be so perfect for what it is we're trying to do with this.
Yeah, I mean, it made me think, my favorite recording of all time is, I'm pretty sure you've heard it. It's Ella Fitzgerald doing Mac the Knife.
Mm.
And, and she forgets the lyrics and
Yeah.
then she just starts improvising and
Yeah.
just chatting. And it's what every time that I feel bummed out, I listen to that. The fact that you make lemonade out of lemons and
Mhm.
you make something that it's even greater than what you thought set out to do.
Yeah.
Um, it
Yeah, there's that other great story of, is it Keith Jarrett, who shows up and his piano, like half the notes don't work and the action is all screwy and he's like, he refuses to play, but he is eventually talked into it. And then because of the restrictions of the instrument, he had to play lighter, he had to play up higher. It became a defining, I forgot the concert now, it was somewhere in Germany, but he almost like invented a new way of playing because of the restrictions, and he just used that to make something great.
how difficult the ending of the film is
Mhm.
so beautiful and how challenging was to find the right tone and the right way to arrive to that ending.
We tried quite a number of different things. And there were a lot of things that went into, our original design was that Joe had already lived a great life and just didn't recognize it. And only in going back and showing 22, trying to convince her why life was great, he started to recognize it himself. But as the scenes developed, we started recognizing, oh, he's actually seeing this for the first time, right?
Right.
So for him to not have a chance to go back and do it the right way felt like we were ripping him off. So then, even there, once you make that decision, like, do you show him going back to be a teacher? Does he go back and be a musician? I think in Kemp, remember we talked about like It's a Wonderful Life. It's a great scene where he's like, Merry Christmas, Bedford Falls. The joy, he's so happy that, like, oh, it'd be great to get that. We tried it. It
Didn't
felt,
work.
yeah, just didn't feel right for us.
I think, I mean, for me at least, what I started thinking of about was just what Pete did with Monsters Inc., with Sully going in the end and we don't see Boo, that we hear Kitty and then we just end on that shot. When I first saw Monsters Inc., I mean, that was really potent. And that proved to me that you don't have to show. And in fact, like, I feel like sometimes showing is us telling the audience what's right and what's wrong. And if we in showing and by not showing what Joe ends up doing, I feel like if we showed what Joe ends up doing, we would have been basically making a judgment on the path of his life. And I think that would have undone the entire movie for us, in my opinion. I feel like it would have, all the work, all the track we laid was to say that it doesn't matter what your job is. It doesn't matter any of these things. Life is about so much more than that. It's about these small moments. So to make a decision for Joe, I think would have kind of undone our central thesis.
You
It would have made
mentioned
some people happy. Of course, people want to see what people were like. I want to see 22. I want to see Joe teaching the students. No, I want to see Joe with Dorothea. It's like, we get that people would have been happy to see all these things, but it would have been to the detriment of the story.
And you mentioned It's a Wonderful Life, which I did think about when I was watching the film. And did you guys also were influenced by Heaven Can Wait and Warren Beatty's Heaven Can Wait?
Yeah, I mean, typically what we try to do is look at any film we can find that has similar elements, and usually it teaches you things that work and things that don't work. Defending Your Life, the great Albert Brooks
Brooks
film,
film.
was another one where like, oh, there's so much humor in what could be pretty delicate stuff, afterlife. And so, let's see, Heaven Can Wait, Christmas Carol we talked about. Oh, and there,
We're like, is this a Christmas Carol thing or is it It's a Wonderful Life thing?
yeah.
There's a lot of vacillating between, are we doing Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life today?
Yeah.
And Jamie Foxx, how early on was he in the project, and tell us about working with him.
Well, what we like to do is, and this has been the case of every film I've worked on, is we design the character, we're pretty locked in, and then we ask casting to bring audio without the video so that we don't know their name or anything. We just hear a voice, and we look at the character design. And Jamie, I was like, wow, that really sounds like it's coming out of this guy that we've designed. Who is that? And they say, oh, it's Jamie Foxx. I'm like, what?
I knew it was Jamie Foxx immediately. I wrote just
You did? Okay, I didn't recognize the
I
voice.
recognized all the voices. I was just like Jamie Foxx, Angela Bassett. Like I was just every single voice I recognized.
So then we record with the actors, and Kemp can tell you, Jamie was a major contributor, not only who he is, but how he talks and all the mannerisms and so on. We end up changing the part quite a bit to write to the actor. And then we animate, was where I was going with that. So the animators, as they're creating the performance, the gestures, the expressions, they are listening to Jamie and whoever the actor is, and they're trying to find little nuances and things to hit those performances and really make it connect, the visual and the audio connect.
Yeah, I think we cast Jamie about 3 or so months after I came on board, Pete. So that would have been, before the end of 2018, I think we'd done our first table read with Jamie.
Right.
Yeah, and Angela Bassett, of course, does Dorothea, and she's terrific in that.
Yeah.
She's also one of the first people we cast.
Yeah, she has such a strength to her. Like you just don't mess around with her. She's got, and so as I say, she's the mountain that Joe has to climb. She's the one that he has to impress in order to get what he wants. And we gave her some tough stuff. Like this scene where she tells a story, like when Joe is admitting kind of very vulnerably that he felt like his life would change, that he would feel different somehow now that he's gotten what he wants. She kind of like looks off and just says, I heard a story about a fish. And she starts telling this story, and we were really kind of inspired off of equivalent stories we'd heard from Miles Davis. Not directly, obviously, but people who would tell stories about him, and he would, like again, Herbie said during one show, Miles could tell he was struggling, and he said, "Don't play the butter notes." And what does that mean? Don't play the butter notes. So we just thought, okay, she's got to talk in sort of a riddle or an enigma, so she doesn't just give him the answer. And that was tough stuff to do, but Angela just nailed it. It's so cool to hear her say that.
But now I'm remembering, Angela actually was our first recording session. She was the first person we recorded. And then there was this huge gap where we didn't record her again, for a long time, remember? So
Yeah.
we recorded her first, and then I think we recorded her like near the end. So it's almost like the whole movie changed around Dorothea.
And
That's
why
right. 'Cause that was one of the first scenes that went into production, was that audition.
Yes, that was the first. Exactly.
And when that happens, when you record with a gap, Kemp, do you play back what they did originally to them, or
No.
just
Once in a while, the actor will ask, "Can I hear what I was doing before?" But in her case, in most cases we ask the actors to just give us you. Don't do a voice. Don't do any sort of affectation.
um I'm pretty sure you've thought about this. The fact that you started this film 4 years ago, but now, in the current state that we're in, and COVID, and that the film, people are watching the film during this period, and I couldn't help, of course, to go. This past months, I've been questioning the choices I've made in my life and stuff. Did you ever imagine that the film will speak in so many ways about where we are right now?
Well, of course, we had no idea of that the world was going to be where it is now
Correct, yeah.
when we started. But I don't know. What do you think, Kemp?
It's so strange because when we were earlier on, we were working on it. I mean, I remember conversations where like, wow, we are telling is this story corny? You know what I mean? Because it's something that I think Pete, and I mean, I know I do. And I think Pete, that what we have in common is that we both believe that, you know what I mean? Like he's had successes at a whole different level, but the reality is like, I've been doing my dream stuff too. And we both realize that the satisfaction doesn't come from achieving those things. It's these smaller moments and getting that idea across to people. I don't know. You just wonder if anyone wants to hear it because everything is so edgy, Yeah. So every storytelling had taken on such an edge. And what we were doing really wasn't trying to be edgy at all. It was trying to be earnest. And I sometimes would question aloud, like, wow, are people going to accept something that's not edgy, that is just earnest and heartfelt and sincere? And then, of course, the world kind of fell off a cliff. So I think it made people more receptive to this earnest story we're trying to tell. But this is always a story we were going for. And I mean, if anything, initially we were supposed to come out in June. And I think that I always kind of believed that we had the spirit of more of a holiday film. I think I said that a lot too. So if there is such a thing as fate, I feel like it's kind of coalesced around this film because it feels like the right film for now, but that wasn't because of anything we were consciously ever trying to do. We were just trying to tell an earnest human story. One thing that really inspired me about coming on board with Pixar, and it goes very, very counter to everything that I've seen in the business and in the industry, is that Pete said that we don't invest in stories, we invest in people, and the people are the storytellers. And you have to understand that's really special. You know, it's not the idea, it's the person. And the person and their voice and their unique voice is the thing that Pixar wants to mine. It's not like, oh, give us ideas and we'll make a Pixar movie. It's like, no, this person has emotions and feelings. And as an artist, we want to mine those and kind of take those out. And if you buy into the spirit of that, you almost kind of go into a bubble where you don't care what the world wants. You just want to tell this really honest, emotional story.
Wow. I couldn't help but when I was watching and the lost souls aspect of the film, you know, that it spoke. During this whole COVID period, there's so many lost souls I've seen out there. You know, people that are sort of, you know, disconnected, and it's quite poignant. I mean, there's so many layers to this film. It's really terrific work.
Oh, thanks. The Lost Souls were originally, those were a really cool discovery because I think we put them in at first just to have some sort of dark, haunted element to this place, so it's not all light and airy, you know. And we thought, oh, they're definitely. My thought was, you see a lot of people who are, you know, wandering the streets who look very lost, but then having this realization, well, you know what? Even those of us who have this passion can be lost and disconnected. Sometimes the very thing we love can end up driving us away from the world in any sort of meaningful, real way. And so it really felt like, in a way, like the furthest extension. If Joe had gone all the way and just completely obsessed all the time about music, he might have become a lost soul himself. In fact, we played with that for a couple scripts in the making of it.
I think we all say that we've been lost at different times in our lives. We've used this thing that we do for a living. We can actually use it to separate ourselves from everyone around us. We can hide behind it. So but the whole point of the lost soul is that you can be found. You can be pulled out of it. It's not a permanent sentence.
Mm-hmm. Well, gents, it's been a pleasure. What an incredible film, and thanks for doing what you guys do. You inspire and push the boundaries of what cinema, you know, is capable of doing. So,
oh, thank you, and thanks for watching. It's nice to be able to do what you love and have it really resonate with people. I think that's about as good as you can get.
Yeah, really. These are the solid days, man. Despite pandemics, we still do this. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, guys, and have a great day.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye.
By the way, I love your poster. The Mr. Hulot's Holiday is one of my
favorites. Holiday, and that's the original. That's the original poster.
Wow. How cool.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
It's one of the most valuable things I own.
Jacques Tati, such a genius.
I love that film.
Yeah.
Great. See you later, guys.
See ya.